Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning in today live on the Inception Radio Network. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com, where you can find out about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, psychic readings, and energy healing. And with the first of the year just around the corner, just a few days from now, it might be time to set up an appointment to get a reading, find out not that I predict the future, but get some clarity on where things are moving forward for you. And I want to congratulate all of you for having survived the end of the world last week. If you haven't listened to that episode of the show, it was pretty fun. I was joined by John Michael Greer, and we really laughed a lot, I think. And also, I want to thank all of the listeners that made Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, number one on Kindle. So I hope you read it. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do enjoy it, please do go on Amazon and write a really nice review, because you love me and you're going to love the book and everything. Anyway, today we're going to be having my good friend Brien Foerster back on the show, because he's been doing a lot of work with the elongated skulls in Peru, and I don't know what he's going to tell me. It's going to be a little bit of a surprise, but he's been getting some DNA testing done, and I think he's been getting some results, and I can't wait. But Brian's appeared on a number of episodes of Ancient Aliens that were filmed in Peru. He actively guides visitors to ancient Inca sites in and around the Cusco area each month. He's written 10 books, which his latest book, actually, I guess this bio is a little bit old, but this is the one we're going to be talking about, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, which he co-authored with David Hatcher's Childress. Brien has also written articles for Graham Hancock and is associated with Lloyd Pye and the Starchild Project. So please welcome from Hidden Inca Tours, my good friend Brien Foerster. Hey, Brien, how are you?
Very well, Dr. Rita. How are you?
I am great. It's always wonderful to hear your voice and have you on the show. So I'm glad you're here.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. But so what I wanted to do is kind of do a little review. I mean, I know we've talked about your book, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, on earlier shows of Just Energy Radio. And I know that they're not on the archives, are not on the Inception Radio Network site. But if people want to listen to some of the other interviews we've done, they can go to www.justenergyradio.com, go to the archive page, click on your name, and it'll bring up all of the interviews that we've done together and all the time we've spent, and we've had some phenomenal times, I must say. And get some background, but I don't want to start in the middle of the story. So let's just do a little bit of review here for the listeners, because you've been investigating the elongated skulls in Peru, and my question is, why investigate them in the first place? What got you into that whole mode?
I guess, I've actually seen photographs and bits of video on TV over the years, and of course they always say they're aliens, and I'd never been to Peru up until 6 years ago, so I had no way to really look at them. But just through my study of megalithic sites in Peru and Bolivia, and especially visiting museums, all of a sudden you'd have this little display of these elongated skulls, and in general they're attributed as being Inca people, and I just started to get intrigued as to why the head shapes were so different, and that's mainly what the book that David and I wrote about was the practice of cranial deformation that's happened through history and globally, mainly happening about 2,000 years ago. But since then, I've been exploring the possibility that some of these skulls are not cranially deformed, that in fact they're natural, that they were born that way. And that's more or less where I'm at now.
What kind of structural anomalies do these skulls have that lead you to question whether cranial deformation was at play or that they could be natural?
Well, the main things are, it's easy to find on the internet depictions or pictures of how cranial deformation was done. In general, it would be either some sort of string or a fabric wrapped around the head of a baby soon after they're born, because the baby's skull is so pliable. And so over the course of 6 months to 3 years, once the calcification of the skull happens, then the skull retains this altered shape. The trouble is that some of these shapes are so complicated that it would be almost impossible to wrap string or rope or textiles or something to achieve the shape. They're too natural looking, whereas most of the ones that I've seen which are cranial deformed, they tend not to be bilaterally symmetrical. So that shows you that the skull has been manipulated on purpose. But some of them are perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, and that I found odd.
Well, aren't there some weird characteristics that have to do with their jaws and kind of the shape of the face as well?
Well, definitely. Great point. The thing is that the jaws tend to be much larger than normal, much more robust looking. The eye sockets are larger than a normal human, sometimes 20% or more larger. Also, the cranial volume in some is greater than contemporary skulls of the same time period, and there are these strange two holes in the back of the skull which seem as though they are for nerve and blood flow to actually come out of the skull or into the skull in order to feed the overly large head.
And I will guess that that's not something that could just naturally manifest because you were deforming the skull.
No, that's a good point. A few people have said, well, that's where pins would be put in or something to hold the fabric or something. But I've shown them to a number of doctors, nurses, and other health professionals from the United States and Europe who have come to visit Paracas. And especially when I show them the holes in the back of the head, they just say, that is not normal. I've never seen that before. And hopefully they're investigating it independently and will get back to me to give me more information.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Any other weird anomalies going on?
The density of the bone material seems to be significantly greater. In some cases, the skulls are 60% heavier than a normal skull of the same time period. But the thing is that it's taken me a long time, to study as many examples as possible, because in any investigation you have to clear out the most obvious answer first, and the most obvious answer is cranial deformation for ceremonial purposes. But again, it's these few examples which are so natural looking. They are vertical, just like Dan Aykroyd's depiction in the Coneheads, and the other, features of the eye sockets, the jaw, the holes in the back of the head, and also quite often the hair color is this reddish brown. It's not black, which is the color you would find if these people or beings were completely Native American.
You know, and I think it's interesting, and I'm going to share this with you, and I don't think I've ever shared this little piece. There's a woman called Marion Zimmer Bradley who wrote a huge series of books. Now, if I could remember the name of the series, but it was Marion Zimmer Bradley, and one of the things that she talks about was these people that lived on the planet, and the Coman, the ruling class, all had like super abilities. Not everybody had like different abilities, like this one could talk to animals and this one could do this and this one could do that, but the way that you could identify these Coman was that they all had red hair, and the common people, none of them had red hair. It always makes me think of that when you talk about the red hair part.
Well, the thing is, that's also been found in many cultures around the world. It's not exclusively here, but in a lot of European traditions and lineages, you have the ruling class having red hair. I've heard even that some of the tribes of Israel also had that the ruling people had red hair or a reddish brownish hair. And when we were on Easter Island, actually a month ago, I guess it was, with Dr. Robert Schock, I heard local traditions saying the same thing, that there was this lineage of ruling class that had red hair, and that even up until reasonably recent times, as in within 200 years ago, that people still dyed their hair red in order to look like the ruling class.
Well, and something that I've always thought, if the skulls that you're finding with these, strange features are natural, then I could, and they were the ruling class, then I could see, down the road where people would, in emulation, start to do head binding to look more like these other people, or, as their faux ruling class.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing with, possibly with the red hair color. That once there was, the thing is that obviously, I think what we're looking at is we're looking at a very small original population of elongated skulled people, possibly with red hair, and that over the course of hundreds of years, they either chose to or had to breed with pure Native American people, and therefore over time, again, you're going to lose the red hair characteristic because it's a recessive gene, and also the skull shape will start to shrink, starting to look normal, and so therefore the cranial deformation would start to be practiced, because these people would have been afraid of losing their elite ruling class. And I've even had we had a geneticist on our tour in November with Robert Schock, and that's what he said. He said, yeah, that completely makes sense.
I just think it's interesting that there is this tie between elongated skulls, red hair, and it's not just found in Paracas or, in that area of Peru, but that it's found in these other sites. Question, in the other places that has been found with the elongated skulls, do they also have the megalithic type constructions associated with them also?
That's a great point. A lot of people think of Egypt, but as far as I know, and as far as Stephen Mailer, who's much more of an expert on Egypt than I am, a lot of people think that King Tutankhamun and the Amarna family had elongated skulls, but technically theirs are not that odd. But when it comes to Paracas, Peru, the area around Cusco, Lake Titicaca, Iraq, Malta, different parts of Europe, including Germany and Austria, you have quite similar looking skulls existing at around the same time, about 2,000 years ago. I'm really hoping we can go farther back if we can find burials which are older than that.
Well, they might find them. It doesn't mean that they'd ever see the light of day.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was the density of the bone material in the skull. In the medical practitioners that you've had come on these tours, have they made any comment associating if you elongated the skull that bone material would become actually thinner and not consistent in thickness?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's completely true because we do have some skulls which are broken, and we have fragments of some elongated skulls which are broken, and you definitely see that. You see some very thin areas where it looks like the binding has taken place, and then thicker areas where it hasn't, but definitely you also see where the bone seems to have been repairing itself during the process because, like you said, or as you mentioned, there is a lot of differentiation in terms of bone thickness.
But in the ones that seem more natural, is it more consistent in thickness?
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to really test that because there are so few examples of them. There's actually two in our collection at Paracas out of 37, I think. And then the other ones are definitely behind glass, controlled by museums that will not allow you to examine them whatsoever or take photographs.
Question in the chat room. Jamie asked, did their brain conform to their skull?
Excellent point, and yes. I was just doing a repair, or actually I'm in the process of doing a repair or reassembly of one, which is on the kitchen table right next to me. And definitely you can see creases and vein lines in the interior, which is, and it's continuous throughout the interior of the skull. I've never seen an example where you'd find this vacant space or smooth area where you would think, and some people have speculated that it was an air pocket or a fluid pocket. It definitely looks like the brain filled the entire cavity in every example I've ever looked at.
You commented on that there were so few of these skulls that look more natural. Were they found more in one area versus another area, or were they just found in miscellaneous spots in, Peru, Cusco area? That makes sense?
Actually, no, that's a great point. The ones in the Paracas area, and they are believe me, they're the most famous ones in the world. If you look up, on the internet, elongated skull or alien skull or human hybrid skull or anything extraterrestrial skull, the Paracas skulls are always the ones which are pictured, and the ones that appear natural are all from one graveyard.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So you never shared that little point with me. What city? I mean, were they more in the Cusco area or more in the Nazca area?
Well, they're just not just outside. They're reasonably close to the little town of Paracas where I am, okay, which is about 4 hours drive north of Nazca. So we're it's right on the coast. And this graveyard is inland by about 10 miles and has adobe pyramids, which are completely falling apart. But it's a massive graveyard that goes on theoretically for 10 kilometers. But it's in these very specific pockets that we've been looking at as the result of doing basically monthly assessments, because there is a lot of grave robbing that goes on here with people called huaqueros looking for gold and silver objects and things like that. So they often, in their plundering, they leave things behind, like parts of skulls, parts of bodies, some little artifacts and things, but that's mainly where most of our specimens have come from, is just stuff which has been left behind by tomb robbers.
When you find those skulls, or when they have found those skulls that seem, because they seem larger to me, or the cranium just seems really heavy. Have they found the rest of the bodies that go with them, or has it just been the skull kind of isolated by itself?
Almost all the time the skeleton is not there, just the skull. Sometimes it's because the body has been wrapped in quite expensive and valuable fabric, and so the tomb robbers tend to take the whole body. The skull obviously disconnects with the body after death after a reasonably short period of time. So the skulls in general are left behind, and the mummy bundle is taken. We have found one, but we haven't extracted it from the ground just because of space consideration at the moment. The museum's kind of full of artifacts, so I'm pondering about that one right now. But in general, we have found major parts of skeletons, but finding an intact one, there is one. We just haven't removed it yet.
Well, I just think it would be interesting to see if associated with the skeleton, or skull that looks natural and bizarre, if there are other anomalies that are associated with the body. Is the structure of the neck different because it has to hold the head differently, or other? Who knows? The possibilities are almost endless when you're talking about something that's anomalous.
Well, that's a great point. Some people have said, are there 6 fingers and 6 toes? And it's like, no, I've never seen that. But in terms of the vertebrae, especially of the neck, they tend to be in pieces all over the place. And I'm not a physician, but I have asked through the internet for years for assistance from physicians and anatomists to come and assist, and there just hasn't been that much input yet. I'm still hoping.
Well, we can just put out some good energy for you in that area.
Thank you.
But coming on shows like this and getting your message out there, because I think this is really important work that you're doing, and so that's why I support it so greatly.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to mention another point, because you're talking about the neck. And that's that I believe it's called the foramen magnum, where the vertebrae of the neck enter the skull. That hole, is in a very specific place because the skull has to balance. Obviously, that's what nature does, is design things beautifully. And in the case of the elongated skulls and other odd skulls that we have, the position of that is in a different place because it seems to relate directly with the size and shape of the skull, which also, I think, leads us to believe that, again, this is a natural phenomenon in some cases, in that nature has provided the balance of where the skull is located based on the position of this foramen magnum.
And see, if it was unnatural, if it was man-made, no pun intended on that, it would appear to me. It would end up appearing deformed, not congruent with what was going on, because our body only makes us a certain way, and if we do things to stress it structurally, I could see it deforming or doing something to try to compensate, but I think it would be pretty clear to anatomists that there was just something not right.
Well, that's a good point, and the thing is that early on, Lloyd Pye of the Starchild project, who has been studying not only the Starchild, but he's been studying the human anatomy, primate anatomy, ancient human anatomy, etc., for, I think, 2 decades now. That's one of the first points he made when I showed him photos of the elongated skulls, was he said that the muscle attachment points that would go from the head down into the shoulders were massive on the elongated skulls compared to a normal human, and therefore that kind of indicates that again nature has done adaptions to the fact that these skulls are a different shape and size than a normal human, so the muscle attachments have to be different.
All right, we have a question from Bob in the chat room, and the question is, have you ever experienced intentional sabotage of your collection or your sites?
No. The collection is a private museum. I don't know who would bother, actually. There've been a lot of people say, well, the government or a government will come and do this or that. I think governments are so busy trying to keep their heads above water at the moment that little projects like mine really don't mean anything to them.
They're too busy going for the guns. But I didn't say that out loud on air or anything, so don't come after me. Okay, I'm going to kind of shift here a little bit. But there's that image of what it looks like an infant with an elongated head. Have you had an opportunity to evaluate that skeleton?
Oh, the little one that's up in the area of Cusco?
Mm-hmm. What looks like a little baby with the elongated head? The alien baby? It's all over the internet. I'm like, alien.
Oh, yeah. No, that is the most interesting one. And it's in a little museum in a little town called Andahuaylilas outside of Cusco. And Senor Renato is the caretaker, and that is the most amazing specimen, I think, that exists on the planet, at least that I've ever seen, even in pictures, because I was up there 2 weeks ago, and he allowed me to take the case off so I could get good photographs of it, because trying to film through glass is terrible. And so he let me do that, and we were able to do very much close-ups of that. And the skull is basically the size of the entire chest cavity area. So it's definitely way out of proportion compared to a normal human being. I've shown that one, like, physically. I've taken a number of doctors and other medical people to that museum. They've looked at it, and they just are speechless. Even one said, literally, this man, actually two of them, or actually no, it's just this one. He's been a doctor for 40 years, and he said, this looks like an alien-human hybrid to me. So that was from a very sedate physician. He just looked at it and he said, oh, come on, So that one is by far the most interesting one. Samples from it have been taken, which are being DNA analyzed. The one thing I can say for sure right now that our geneticist has told us is that it is a female, but we still have to we're hoping to get the complete genome from it. And if we're able to do that, then that will be, I think, something like 3 billion base pairs of DNA that we'll be able to look at. And that will give us every possible thing involved with that little being, telling us not only whether it's completely human, because if some of the DNA strands are not in the global database of humanity, then that gives an indication of something very strange is going on. But also it will also obviously tell us the human, whether 100% or not, the human aspects and exactly where the bloodlines come from, which is very interesting to me.
Since you've gotten to look at it up close and personal, does it show the same kind of anomalies as some of the other ones, the weird jawline and the extra holes in the cranium?
Yeah. It has all of them, and it's all exaggerated on that one, or at least it's the extreme example that we've seen so far. The baby is thought to have been less than a year old, but dentists who I've taken there as well, and doctors, the dentists who looked at it have estimated that the teeth, as in the molar development, in that baby are that of a 7-year-old human. So that automatically tells you something extremely weird is going on.
Okay, wasn't expecting that.
No.
I have a totally different question then. So when they look at the suturing in the skull, and then there's also some suturing in other bones, can they determine, or has anybody looked at that to determine, could it be a 7-year-old that is just really tiny?
No, it's actually almost impossible because there is still the hole, or the cranial plates have not completely fused, so there's still a hole almost the size of a silver dollar, showing us how the plates are moving together. They're very thin on the edges, so you can see the development of them, so that according to the most of the medical personnel who have looked at it in my presence, they've all said that baby was somewhere around a year or less than a year, because full fusion typically happens around, I believe, 14 months.
Okay, good. Does this skull have 2 plates or 3 plates, or is it 3 or 4? I'm a little confused. I'm confusing myself, Brien. But I mean, does it have, one big plate in the back, or is that it's split how it is in humans? Because I know that was one of the questions that has come up with regard to some of these skulls, was the number of cranial plates.
Yeah, at least of the major ones. There are quite a few cranial plates, but most of them are small. But the main ones, which you see on the forehead and top of the head, there are 3 of them. There's the frontal plate, which is obviously in the front, and then the 2 parietal plates, which are on the sides, and they connect in a T shape like that. So there are some examples that seem to only have 2 plates, the frontal and the parietal, which again throws doctors off. And even in terms of cranial deformation, I haven't heard a logical reason as to why the 2 parietal plates would have fused together so well that you would see nothing. I mean, you should see a hairline crack or something, but in some cases you see absolutely nothing. This baby seems to have 4 plates coming together.
4?
So, yeah, actually there are examples of that too, or as well. Wow.
Okay. So it just gets curiouser and curiouser. So based on how large the baby is and the amount of fusion of those cranial bones, based on your research into deformation, if this was done by head binding, would it be possible to create a shape like that in such a short period of time?
Not that complicated. And the thing is, in the case of the little baby one, the head is so oversized. It's really like dramatically out of whack with common reality. And of course some people say, well, it's water on the brain, and it's like if you see photos of water on the brain, or hydrocephaly as it's technically called, you'll see that the head forms the shape of a beach ball. And this is not what we're looking at. We're literally looking at cone heads.
Have they identified where this baby was found, and when they found it, did they find any kind of the burial materials with it?
That's a great question. It was found about an hour's drive away from this little town, in a cemetery up on top of a mountain. And I was going to give the name of the mountain away, but unfortunately I think too many people will probably try to flock there and have a look, because Senior Renato, who's the caretaker of the skull, who is an anthropologist. He's not just some wacky guy who runs a museum. He's a, university certified anthropologist. He said there are others up there and remains of others, and he wants to take me up up to visit the site next month. So I'm definitely going to do that. And of course, he also tells me that there are 7-foot 2-inch skeletons in a close location as well.
Yeah, and I mean, that's fine. The part that I'm curious about is, they can tell a lot about an individual, their status, their place in society with their grave goods. And I just get curious, when you find these skulls, I mean, it just is sad that there are no grave goods associated to see, did they have very richly designed textiles or jewelry or anything to kind of give you an indication of where they were in the pecking order and social role in the society.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a great point. And the thing is, what we've done when we've found, the remains is usually whenever there are textiles associated with them, which is, quite reasonably common, or you'd find little artifact bits around, you can get a good indication of social status, because if you find bits of fine pottery, then obviously that's someone of a high social order, because common ancient pottery that you find around Peru is just clay. Common people didn't have really flashy ceramics, only the wealthy did, as well as textiles. In the case of one we have in the Paracas Museum, which is a baby less than a year, the skull is still wrapped in the funeral fabric, because Senior Juan, who runs the gallery or the museum, wants to keep it intact that way. And the fineness of that cloth is astonishing. And also there were feathered goods found with the baby, and those feathers are only from tropical birds from the Amazon. And so we being on the coast, that means, you're seeing a trading system from the Amazon basin, and the only people who would have that kind of very rare item would be, again, the royalty, and of course the baby has red hair, but I'm digressing.
Not really. You're kind of, creating a picture.
Ah.
Pulling all these little pieces together. I just find, I don't know, it's fascinating to me. So let's talk a little bit about the DNA part specifically. Let's see, where do I want to ask first? Let's start with the testing by itself. So you mentioned about the little baby, the alien baby, that you found out that it was a female, but what kinds of tests are they running? Are they doing like some carbon-14 based testing as well to date them? The DNA you mentioned, any other kinds of tests?
Well, the DNA specialists who are working on this, and they're basically doing it voluntarily, because to get this done by simply hiring a lab would cost, I think, hundreds of thousands, or at least it would be so expensive, because the machines involved now that do DNA testing are multi-million-dollar machines. So just the running of them, just turning the switch on, costs a lot of money. So they're doing this voluntarily because of their interest in it, and what they're hoping to do is to do as much as possible with the amount of money that we've been able to raise, which is $7,000 is what we've been able to raise. I can't say only, but still, that will pay for the reagents and things. And what they're hoping to do again is to recover the entire genome from as many samples as possible, so that they can basically have the entire blueprint of who these people were. So that's what we're hoping on, and supposedly we're going to get some results at some point next month. But I obviously can't push them, because they're doing it out of the goodness of their own intellectual curiosity.
And this is that Dallas-based lab?
Yeah, it's a Texas-based lab, but they are coordinated with other major laboratories in the U.S., some of which are major university labs. And so So it's not just one person or one lab. It looks like it'll be a group of labs that will be involved in different aspects of it.
I just still think that's really cool. Not that, I'm big on pitching stuff, but if somebody wanted to donate some money to this cause, where could they go to do that?
If they go to my website, which is www.hiddenincatours.com, there's a contact form there. And we take donations by PayPal, which I send directly to the geneticist. I don't, there is no organization involved. It's simply me receiving funds and giving all of it 100% directly to the genetics team.
You mean you don't have to give your wife some because you have skull fragments sitting on your kitchen table?
No, she's amazing. It doesn't faze her one bit. As long as they're not there at dinner time, then that's all that's important.
Okay. How many specimens were sent? Or, how many different individuals were selected to take specimens?
8 specimens. The thing that I did is I did not give I simply numbered them 1 through actually 10 samples from 8 individuals, and I simply numbered them. I did not send them a description of who or where the samples came from, because that's what a double-blind study is supposed to be. The testers are not supposed to know what they're looking at, but also, luckily, what they've said is if more samples can be sent to them, then they will do as many as possible. So, thankfully, from this, we should get at least minimum 1 very good result from 1 individual, which at least is a beginning.
Have they been able to, have you found out, I think this is a better way to phrase it, whether they have found viable DNA? I know that, in forensic cases, because I like watching those kind of forensic file shows, that sometimes the DNA is just not viable or it's contaminated. Have you gotten any word regarding that yet?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point, because actually, from the baby one, they were able to get a very good. They were astonished at how good and at how uncontaminated the sample was. So they're hoping to actually get the entire genome out of that one. I was told early on, more than a year ago, by Lloyd Pye, by different geneticists, by a guy called Jerry Wills, who is a great investigator. They all told me the same thing, and that's be as sterile as possible when you're doing the sampling or taking the sample. So, of course, rubber gloves, a mask, and immediately placing into a sterile container was essential. So far it's worked out very well. They also have because these are 2,000 plus years old, the DNA breakdown can be, a lot, and there will be the presence of bacteria, because, of course, bacteria feed on ancient tissue and have done for probably 2,000 years. So they have actually a new technique which automatically screens that out. The computer detects, DNA which is clearly nothing related to any kind of hominid-type being, like bacteria, and simply screens that out. So that's one of the latest DNA tests that is available.
Cool. The samples that you sent, were they bone samples, teeth samples? I mean, you've mentioned that some of these skulls still have their red hair, or have you sent them hair/scalp samples? Skin samples, I guess.
Yeah, the very best samples possible are from human or from molar teeth, because the DNA is inside the tooth, and if the tooth is intact, then that acts like a time capsule. So that's by far the best. But unfortunately, some of the skulls didn't have the teeth had fallen out or whatever. So, and in order to get a broad series of tests done, I did send hair, skin, and teeth from different individuals.
The ones that you sent, how did you determine which ones you were going to sample versus not choose from?
Well, technically, I should also say that it wasn't me who sent them. It was, they were selected. The best way to put it is they were selected to be sent. And what we did is we looked at the oddest examples possible, as well as one normal one used as a control. So again, that's why they were simply numbered, so that there is a normal human whose age we know of. It was an Inca period skull that was found basically in a pillaged graveyard via the museum, through the museum's staff, and so that was included to act as a control. And so we basically looked for the more like the odder examples of the elongated skulls, either larger, stranger shape or whatever, and made sure also that they didn't all come from the exact same location, so that we might have some kind of location differences too.
Any problems in getting the caretakers of the skulls to let you take samples?
No, it's incredibly easy in Peru. Maybe because to some degree it's such an ancient country, and there are almost literally artifacts everywhere. There are 2 graveyards that we go and visit and check for to see if there's anything new that's literally come out of the ground and been left behind. And there are roads that go right through them. And as we're doing our sampling, people literally just drive by, not noticing that there are, all of these skeletons and hunks of pieces of skeleton lying on the ground right next to their automobiles. It's a strange concept, but believe me, it's true.
So what do the locals think of these skulls? Is there any stories that have come down to them as to who these people were or why they had these big cone heads?
Well, the thing is, on the coast of Peru, basically all the people who live here are not genetically related to the ancient Paracas people. Almost everyone here is from the highlands of Peru. And, to go into the history briefly, it's because of the depopulation that happened when the Spanish first arrived. Disease swept through the land. People were moved into urban centers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's basically no one genetically related. There are no real descendants. And so basically nobody gives a damn, to be frank about it. It's just like, oh, that's a weird looking thing, and then they just sort of wander off. I've literally been, outside the museum measuring the volume of the skulls by filling them with sand and doing photography, and the local people just walk past without stopping and looking. It's quite odd.
Well, I guess it's something that you were brought up with, and, it was just always there. But it was also apparently, from what you're saying, from a time before theirs and from a culture that wasn't theirs, and so maybe they don't know either.
Yeah, I think there's no local history because these people lived minimum 2,000. They died out, and the cranial deformation disappeared 2,000 years ago. So, we're talking the equivalent of I don't know. That's a long time period, and you have genetic flow no matter where in the world you live. So yeah, they're not genetically related, and to some degree, probably that's why they're not interested or don't really care. They have other things more important in their lives. But we in North America, for example, from North America, who have kind of to some degree limited history, unless you're Native American. Then again, a lot of the ancient stuff of North America doesn't intrigue or tend to intrigue most North Americans.
Good point. Have there been any genetic analysis of any skull that has been found anywhere in the world other than the ones in Peru?
Not actually. The funny thing is, not that I know of, and there has been this tendency for researchers to not be able to be allowed to examine a lot of them for some strange conspiracy theory with reason. They're like hundreds of them have been found on the island of Malta, and all of a sudden they disappear from the museum collections, or at least access. They disappear. In Lima, where there are hundreds of them kept by museums, but there are like 4 of them on display. At Tiwanaku, which is one of the most intriguing places in the Americas, which is in Bolivia, there was a big collection there in the museum, and that display has been permanently closed down. I don't know honestly why. I'm not sure if it's a conspiracy or what, but it's just a tendency that people in the area where these exist, they don't have a tendency to want to know too much about them.
I just think it would be fascinating, using the skulls in Malta as an example, if by running the genetic profiles, if they would end up finding commonalities between them. Red hair, elongated skulls, or, the ones on Easter Island. One to anywhere. I don't even care. As long as they have the elongated head and the red hair, if there would be some kind of genetic connection between them. Just my little curious brain going.
No, well, that's sorry, but yeah, that is a very good point, because that's obviously in the back of my mind all the time, is because we've seen them distributed around the world and the practices are similar, the time period is similar. Is it possible that some of these are related? The book that David and I wrote does go into that to a great extent, but that's why I'm starting with phase 1, which is looking at the Paracas and Cusco area skulls and doing their DNA analysis. If we find interesting information, which I'm sure we will, then phase 2 will be going farther afield in Peru and Bolivia and possibly Ecuador. And then, eventually I'd love to have a global database, but that will cost money and it'll take years. But I'm dedicated to the project, so I'm very much looking forward to learning as the days, months, and years go on.
Cool. So there was a question from Josh in the chat room, and it says, what theories have been suggested for the various sizes and shapes of these skulls? In other words, why the variety?
Well, the variety isn't as great as it sounds, or it's not as varied as it sounds. It's just that by the different practices used would cause different shapes to some degree. But in general, what they were trying to do was basically that's what it is. It's elongation. In some instances, it's vertical, like in Paracas, whereas in the sculptures of ancient Egypt, it looks more like a horizontal form. We have 5 different basic shapes in Paracas, but they're not all that different. They vary, but they're not incredibly different from one another.
In some of the ones that are found in other areas, is there a consistency in the shape, or can you tell ones that come from like the Paracas area versus ones that might be found somewhere else?
No, it's not. At least so far, it's not that distinctive. What's more interesting is that the ones that are natural looking, the examples that I've seen from Europe look the most similar, and the main feature is there's a bulge in the forehead, which is really kind of odd. But that I've seen examples, photos from museums in Germany and Austria that look that way, whereas others are more. It's more like where the forehead has been kind of flattened, and that's obviously that's deformation. That's just flattening of a forehead. But it's the really interesting ones which are three-dimensionally altered, and again bilaterally symmetrical that are the most intriguing, and they're part of the reason why the main geneticist came on board with it, because she's also a veterinarian and has studied anatomy, and she just looked at the skull and she said, "I don't understand what that is."
That's like having your doctor go, "Oops," while you're in the middle of surgery. That's bad when they don't have a clue on something that you would think would be so basic, but it's not. There's a big difference between having an individual anomaly. Like the Starchild is an individual anomaly. We have not seen 3, 4, 5, 10 of them show up. But what you're seeing in your area, there are a lot of them. It's not just one.
Oh yeah, and that's a great that's a great point. I mean, I really feel for Lloyd because he's spent 12 years on this, and he has one Starchild, whereas in Peru there are hundreds of these, and it also makes it great for doing testing too, because if you simply have, for example, hair which turns out to be something very weird in terms of analysis, like what I've heard people who are studying the Bigfoot phenomenon, they find hair samples, and some of those results are turning out to be very weird. But unless you can go back to the specimen and get more, people are simply, to a great extent, going to laugh at you, because it's like, well, you found some weird hair. In the case of the elongated skulls, it's like, well, do you need another sample? Here. Do you want to come and visit? Do you want to hold this in your hands? It's like, here it is.
Good point. When you compare the elongated skulls to the skull of the Starchild, I mean, obviously the Starchild, the most obvious feature is the kind of compression of the face area and the eye sockets. But when you look at the cranium itself, I don't really know a whole lot about the Starchild, sorry. But is there an elongation feature to it, or how does that compare with what you have?
The Starchild is a lot different. Lloyd's been able to figure out, I think, 25 physical characteristics of it, which are not known to be in any way, shape, or form human. There is a lot of information on the Starchild Project or StarchildProject.com website about that. But the basic thing that seems to be the case with the Starchild is that, at least the most recent information, is that the baby, whatever it was actually carried within a human female until birth. So it's as though it was artificially implanted. Whereas with the elongated skulls, they seem to definitely be either human or human mixed with some humanoid, which is so close genetically that the two could interbreed. So that's the difference. The Starchild is completely fascinating, and I'm astonished that Lloyd hasn't received more financial and scholarly support for his work, because it is an incredible enigma.
Really, we have maybe 2 minutes left, and I know that you have like a huge big trip to Egypt coming up, and I just wanted to get some details about that. When is it happening? Who are you going with? What's all going on? Because usually you're just in Peru. Why are you going to Egypt?
Well, it's because of my relationship with Stephen Mailer, who's an oral tradition specialist of ancient pre-dynastic Egypt, and also Christopher Dunn, the author of the Giza Power Plant. We together set up this tour. Chris has been here 3 times, I think. He's looked at all the megalithic buildings. So we want to do a real study, a comparative study between the megalithic building techniques and evidence of Peru, Bolivia, and Egypt to see if we can find evidence of an ancient global culture, possibly a pre-end of the Ice Age culture. And so that's April 15th to 28th.
And if people want to get some information on that, or sign up, or whatever?
There's a great banner that's on the front page of my website, www.hiddenincatours.com. That gives you a link which shows you detailed day by day what we'll be looking at, as well as how you can sign up, etc. But what about that tour in June, Dr. Rita?
Yeah, well, we don't really have the details out, but Brien and I are working up some secret plans that might have to do with elongated skulls in Peru in June. So you're going to have to keep tuned to find out all the details about that. Woohoo! Oop, there's the music, Brien, which means I have to let you go.
Okay, all the best as always.
All right, Brien. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
That's Brien Foerster. His web pages are hiddenincatours.com and brianfoerster.com. Check out his YouTube channel. He has them posted on his Hidden Inca Tours webpage. He has tons of videos. Check them out. Got pictures of skulls and all kinds of stuff. And after we come back from break, we're going to be talking to Betsy Lewis about angels or aliens. We'll be back after these messages.